Hello everyone, my name is Stanley St. Rose, and today we're going to be talking about Blackberrying, written by Sylvia Plath. Now, before I go into summary analysis of this work, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment so that the channel can continue to grow. Now, in this work by Sylvia Plath, we were first introduced to her when, she's picking blackberries within, the first few lines of the poem. This is adult Sylvia Plath, and the reason why I say that's because blackberrying is usually left to the kids, but this is a grown woman and she's picking blackberries and she's kind of like having fun, and the first stanza is very welcoming. She tells us about these blackberries and how big they are, how fat they are. She talks about the juices in her hands and how, when she picks them up, sometimes she crushes them a little bit and the juices fall in her hand. She tells us about the colors, and she tells us about the experience, and that they might love her, that the blackberries might love her because they go into her milk bottle quite easily. And it's just a fun time. It's a great time. Everything was amazing. And then the second stanza and the last stanza, everything just gets dark, because within the second stanza, she goes into, she stumbles upon a bush of blackberries that's covered with flies all around, and they're eating the blackberries, and then after eating it like honey, they believe in heaven. And so the second stanza, it goes to a place that's dark, because then we start talking about death, and heaven, because when you think about flies and you think about horror movies and you think about the way that human beings see flies, there's a lot of flies in one place, it's never good. It's never good. Whenever you want to, in a movie or a series, whenever you want to convey that a body is dead and decaying, you just have a bunch of flies on it, and you have the flies buzzing around and eating the dead body and, all that kind of stuff. That's how you convey death, and you make everything grim and gloomy. So a bush covered in a bushel of flies is never good. And to me, when I look at that, I think about death and dying and just not good things. That's just a horrible sign. And then also the mention of heaven, and how after the flies are done eating these berries and this honey-like state, or this honey, they believe in heaven, which kind of makes me think about the Eucharist and how Christians eat wine and bread, and symbolizing the blood and body of Jesus Christ. So that there's religion in the second stanza. It talks about death. It talks about resurrection, and that's what that reminds me of. And this is a confessional poem, so when you think about Sylvia Plath, who is a confessional poet, this speaks a lot about her life and what she went through, because, we know that she died at age 30. She committed suicide. And if you're a Christian, you know that, suicide is a grave sin. And so that the second stanza is just packed with information. It's honestly, it's kind of overwhelming, because, I'm like reading this poem, I'm having a great old time, talking about berries and putting berries in milk bottles and just enjoying some blackberrying. And then she just throws flies in my face and talking about bushels of flies in heaven, and pretty much making me think about, drinking the blood of Jesus Christ and the body of Jesus Christ. So the poem it takes a sharp turn. It definitely takes a sharp turn. So the last stanza goes into her following this path through these mountains and looking at the colors of the mountains, and then she talks about nothingness, and she describes light, and just the poem just pretty much, by the time the third stanza is over, I'm just paraphrasing the poem so you guys get an idea of what's going on. By the time the poem is over, you don't know what's being talked about, because you thought this is a poem. You sat down to read about blackberries, and it ends up being about death and God and Christ and suicide and dying and sin and childhood. So, yeah. let's go into the analysis and the deeper meaning of this poem. So the first thing I will say about what she's talking about here, is that since we know that Sylvia Plath is a confessional poet, we know that it reveals a lot about her life. First and foremost, she comes from a Christian background. When she was a child, she used to go blackberrying. So the poem makes us think about, maybe since she's doing it as an adult, picking blackberries as an adult, that she enjoyed blackberrying as a child, and she's trying to, she kind of wishes she was a child again, and her father didn't die when she was 8, so she could play around, have fun, enjoy blackberrying. Because think about it, when you're a kid, you have both of your parents, you don't have to think about the problems of the world. You don't have to think about politics and the plight of your country and your place in life and your identity and all that kind of jazz. All you have to do is play with your friends, have a good old time, and be a kid, right? That's what is expected of you in most places in the world as a child. So Sylvia Plath kind of thinks about those simpler times when she was happy and with her father and her family. But then it all twists around because she's an adult now and she can express deep thoughts. She tells us about death and suicide, and maybe she's thinking about committing suicide because, a bushel of flies is never fun. It's never, when you bring that up, it's extremely significant. And since she has that Christian background, again, for Christians, committing suicide is the most dastardly thing, the most dark thing that you can do. So her mother probably told her that when she was growing up. So that's probably something she wrestled with. So the fact that she's mentioning these flies, eating these berries like honey, and then believing in heaven, it kind of tells us a lot about her and maybe her thoughts about committing suicide and what might be holding her back or what might not be holding her back, because that has to play in her mind somewhere of the sin and maybe not going to heaven and what suicide is going to cost. And in the end, the last stanza for me just leaves us in a dark place because she tells us this hook brings her on this path, and she makes me think about sheeps and shepherds, or a shepherd and his sheep, because a shepherd has to lead the sheep. And she kind of talks, she even says she goes down the sheep path, right? The sheep's path. And this hook brings her down this path. She doesn't do it willingly. Well, she doesn't do it through her own will, because if we think about it, this hook brings her down. And also, she, from her real life, we know that she faced a lot of depression and melancholy and, a lot of mental problems that she faced. So, sometimes depression and when you have to face mental challenges like that, it can lead you to suicide and dark thoughts and thoughts of dying. And she tells us this hook brings her there. Now, a hook to me, I don't, at the beginning of the poem, the hooks that she talks about, they seem friendly, but the last hook that she talks about, this hook that brings her down the path, it seems menacing to me. It seems dark to me. And hooks are never a good thing. I've never seen hooks depicted as a pleasant thing, especially when they're leading you down a path. So the poem, to me, it shows you that Sylvia Plath was having thoughts of suicide, that she was thinking of, when people are thinking about suicide, they think it out. Most people, well, I'm just assuming this, I am not an expert on this, but based on this poem, we can see that she thought about her childhood, she thought about when she was most happy, she thought about this comfort that she had, this sisterhood, this blood sisterhood that she had with these blackberries. We know that she had a rough life with her father dying and her husband divorcing her, and she had kids. She had a daughter. She had a daughter and a son, which is they were around when she committed suicide, and also her son later committed suicide. So there might be something there, some dark thing there within the family, because. Or maybe his mother's death and suicide might have affected him, or it could be a series of things. Well, I'm not analyzing him. I'm analyzing this poem. So, based on this poem, knowing the fact that Sylvia Plath Plath is a confessional poet. You know, it makes us think about, you know, she thought about suicide. She thought about maybe reasons not to do it. She thought about when she was most happy and thinking about turning back there as an adult. She thought about religion, Christianity, her faith. She thought about death. And then she thought about this hook leading her down the sheep path between these mountains. So that's the poem. That's the poem. That's what it's talking about. Childhood, death, religion, Eucharist, being led down a path. It kind of feels like the hook was the shepherd and she was the sheep. She kind of felt like she didn't have a choice. I mean, depression, a lot of people a lot of people feel like they don't have a choice. And that's the poem. That's what happens, and that's at least my perspective. There's always, you know, more to poems and different ways you can read them, but that's what I got from it. That's what I'm analyzing from it. Interesting, very interesting, but at the same time, very dark, especially when you realize that, you know, she died so young. Her son, you know, lived decades after she committed suicide. He committed suicide as well. The only person who survived was the daughter, and that's I mean, for the daughter, that's a lot. It's a lot to go through. But yeah, that's my summary and analysis. That wasn't really a happy one, but happy Leif Erikson Day. I'll see you guys in the next video.